So we need to send it. So actually, this API is going to need an alias for the new track.
Yeah, it's going to, and you're going to need the option that the server side switch error. Well, maybe actually,
Well, no,
subscribe error.
Yeah,
You send subscribe error and then you redo the switch.
That room is not.
And then there's some assumptions that things remain constant.
I think we're drawing one.
So the namespace remains the same. Group order remains
All right,
the
it's
same.
1 o'clock.
Contract remains consistent.
All right, greetings everyone. It's 1 p.m. So we're going to get started. 1 p.m. local time.
Mike?
Oh yeah. Greetings everyone. It's 1 p.m. So we're going to get started. It's our 1 p.m. local time. So our mascot today is Hooperman, or Hooperman. I don't know how it's pronounced. Who is the mascot for Shamrock Rovers FC here in Dublin. This is the note well. You've probably seen it many times by now, but this governs the intellectual property implications of you being here, as well as some code of conduct issues. And then we've been asked for you to note really well some behavioral suggestions on how we should behave. Don't harass people, be professional, etc. Hopefully, most of you don't need to be reminded of that. Okay, so we are of course using MeetEcho for this. If you are here in the room and you've not yet scanned the QR code to record your attendance, please do so. Those of you who are remote have probably already figured out all the MeetEcho stuff. Those of you who are here, if you wish to speak, you should add yourself to the queue by using the little raise hand button in the tool, whether it be the remote tool, the light client or the full client. If you are using the full client and you are here in the room, please mute everything. Okay, this is the agenda for today. Are we canceling Stomp?
I haven't seen any slides, so
Okay. So this is the agenda. So we're in the administrative phase right now, and that's going to be a very short consensus call as part of that to wrap up yesterday's business. Then we're going to talk for a few minutes about our workflow to address some emerging problems or maybe persistent problems in that. And the 15 minutes is really for discussion if there's some feedback about it. Then Will is going to update us about the Warp catalog merge. He's going to make a different presentation about MOQT called Switch. Ian is going to talk about a proposal related to timestamps. And then Stomp and Ray may not show up. And if it's an MOQ time protocol of some kind, and if it does not, then we certainly have time if time permits. And there's a number of issues there that are in the queue. So we will definitely run the full 90 minutes today. We need a scribe. So once again, Alan has brought chocolate you can choose from, and of course we have yet more fine subgroup sugar that you can also consume and share with your friends. Or we can sit here and stare at each other uncomfortably until someone agrees to be the scribe. I guess I'll use the time while I wait for someone to raise their hand to say once again that it is actually better for you to take a summary of the decisions made and the key points rather than a verbatim blow-by-blow of all the discussion, because there's a video already. People who want to spend an hour watching or 90 minutes watching all the discussion can do so. But people looking for a short summary of what happened in MOQ would really, really love to have that kind of summary. And so you should not be typing furiously for the entire 90 minutes.
The bribes are wearing off. It's not good.
So Shameen who did the Stomp stuff didn't know anyway, but I just submitted the slides, so you should have the slides.
okay.
Okay.
I mean,
But yeah, okay. I tried reaching out over emails and I didn't get any response. So
It is 4 a.m. for him right now.
Yeah, but I already did it. It's been over 24 hours since I reached out for slides, so that's the.
Okay. So do you want to put it back in?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
I
Okay.
have no preference on what you do. I'm
Yeah.
just giving
Okay,
you the
so-
slides for a newcomer.
Yeah.
All right. So Shamim's presentation is back on the agenda, and we are still awaiting a scribe.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mo.
I'm going to
means showing up or anything.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so it's some sort of a quantum state between occurring in this meeting and not. All right.
Yes.
Why don't you handle this?
Yes. So we had a discussion yesterday around the priorities, etc. Based on additional input from Alan on the mailing list, etc., and reconsidering what actually happened in the session, I did start a consensus call on the mailing list. I might be a way of short circuiting this to actually take a show of hands here. And I will start with just asking around if there's consensus on going with option 2. And I will only ask additional questions if it seems to be warranted based on the response here. So I have now started it.
We pre-typed it. That's a pro move, Magnus.
Yes.
It's just slow.
Yeah. The pull request 518.
It's still not here for me.
Yeah. I think you can start. Alan, have you accepted the slides from Stump?
I'm sorry.
Can you check them and approve them? So.
Yeah, I got it.
Okay. It's going back and forth. It seems to be very problematic. So, yeah, it looks like we will get some more time, but yeah.
If you're late arriving, this is a good chance to scan the QR code and mark your attendance here. And that will also allow you to participate in the poll if that is enticing to you.
You can say no opinion.
Proposal number 2 is the one where the publisher indicated priority overrules the group ordering. See how I did that? Use any reserved words and describe it.
Okay. But yeah, it seemed to be stable. And if you didn't manage to get it in, you can always respond on the mailing list. So I will terminate here. We have 8 yes, 1 no, and 18 no opinions. I don't think, unless if you have additional feedback, send it to the list.
Right. Should we have the 1 no, give a chance to articulate there?
If they want to, yes.
Yes, if the 1 no vote would like to make themselves known and maybe try to convince the group that would be welcome at this time.
Okay, let's move on. The mailing option for mailing list is available. So.
Okay. Can you fire up the slides for me?
Yes.
All right, of course, I'm, as you probably know, I'm Mark Duke, one of your friendly chairs, and I'm here on behalf of the chairs to talk about a little bit of a process improvement. Next slide. All right, so I think there are 2 problems that we're trying to solve here. One is that I think anyone who's watched us at the virtual interims would say that we've done kind of a bad job as chairs at confirming consensus on the list. We have this potentially weeks of exhausting back and forth between virtual interims and the GitHub and so on. And by the time we kind of bring all that, it's like, oh gosh, now we got to go to the list, and we really want to wait 2 weeks, and the document deadline is coming up, and so it's a bad dynamic, and we're going to try to fix that. And then the second thing is the virtual interims are so in practice, this consensus is happening in virtual interims, and the virtual interims are improving what was going on before, but they're also pretty onerous. Like anytime you have a synchronous meeting, it's not going to work for somebody because of time zone, or they have to, send their kid to school, take their kid to school, or whatever. And they are laborious to run. There's uploading videos to YouTube, which is a manual process with tickets and stuff, and finding scribes, and it's a lot of overhead. So we're trying to find a solution that kind of solves both of these problems at once, acknowledging that I think as a group, it would be fair to say we've not been awesome at asynchronous communication in the past. Next slide. Okay, so there are 3 pillars to a proposal here, and we would love to have comments about if this is kind of the right direction to go. We're going to borrow some things from one of the QUIC working group consensus processes that were used, kind of earlier in its history, and that is that we are going to call consensus on each draft diff. So we're going to publish 08 here, probably a little bit before the Denver interim, 2 weeks before the Denver interim. That will actually be published, and then the chairs will start a consensus call, and then essentially we can ratify that when we get to the meeting. So that is when things enter into when blocks of text enter into the hall of the consensus, the hall of consensus rather than the hall of not consensus. Of course, you can always reopen an issue if there's new data, there's implementation experience. It turns out something's a terrible idea. Nothing is completely closed until we ship it to the ISG. But nevertheless, that's kind of the idea here. So what does that mean for our merges? Okay, so first of all, non-editorial PRs, we're just going to allow the editor to use their discretion. In that case, Ian is our current editor. I think he's displayed like he's had a proper reticence in just merging stuff without like waiting for discussion to occur. Certainly with anything of substance, we're going to commit to non-editorial PRs remaining open for 2 weeks for people to comment on. At most there's usually about 6 or 7 PRs open at a time, and so it should be a reasonable amount of time to get through those. Ian or the chairs may send an email if we feel there's an important PR that has not gotten much attention in GitHub, just to kind of poke people. So please monitor the list for that. And then as part of a byproduct of this, we're going to try to cut the virtual interims down to bi-weekly, hope there's a little bit less load on everyone, and really reserve that for things that require some of this like high bandwidth discussion. So if something's running around on GitHub, or if there's an issue or there's a basic discussion about approach, I think we've generally been using the virtuals for that. We'd like to continue to do that and not try to rely on that to be an agenda driving function, which attention focusing function, which is what it's been. So that's the last slide for this, and I would love to hear feedback from the community. Go ahead.
Jahed, as Eddie, thanks for doing these retrospective things, because I think we have been talking about it, how to improve how we run this working. Well, this is one of the things I think has been there to be improved, and really I say this to me personally. I think I like this process, like it's more clear, and I've been asking also use mailing list even, because it's not. We cannot expect everybody to do like a GitHub thing, and then maybe the digest that comes to GitHub from the GitHub to the mailing list is not that detailed. I think this is the right process to have it. I support that one, and thanks for doing it. And I'll let the working group to actually comment on if there is a process thing here. But I really, really appreciate you guys are doing it. Thanks.
Thank you, Zahed. As everything we do process, this is an experiment. If like we do this for 2 months and it completely runs aground, we'll of course reevaluate and figure something else out. But I ask you for your cooperation trying to make this a success. All right, I don't see, oh, Alan.
Yeah, this is more of a chair comment, and it's not directed at this process, but sort of an adjacent one, which is that we've been trying with the editor to triage the issues that are open and make sure that they're assigned. And we have a parked label for things that we don't think we can advance right now, but we will come back to. And we're going to continue to try to triage through all the open issues and assign them to people or mark them needs PR. So we also, you may notice if you look through GitHub that you have some issues assigned to you to drive forward or make a PR for in one way or another. And I think there's probably another 30 or 40 issues we haven't gotten through yet, but will.
Yeah. So one thing we're going to do with the time we're freeing up by canceling half of the virtual interims is to do a little more triage. You know, obviously we can't force anyone to do anything work-wise, but if you are assigned an issue or a PR and you don't want to do it, please like just respond and say, I don't want to do this. I'm not willing to do this, and we can accommodate that. If you open an issue and are not willing to drive it forward, we may just close it. If you're the author of that issue, but that's a separate, somewhat separate thing. Will.
Will Akamai. I like this for the virtual interims. Could the chairs say a day or two before the interim, put out an email saying, hey guys, reminder, there's a call this week. Because I have a lot of trouble with the calendaring on IETF and getting it in my corporate stuff.
Okay.
And if you just send I read emails, so send an email
Great.
and put the link in, and then we'll click it and we'll get better attendance.
We have the intent of sending out like an agenda like the Friday or Monday before. We've not been 100% successful at that for various reasons. We will attempt to do better. Harold.
Just because I might like to adopt this. When you say a 2-week consensus call on the list for each diff between 2 drafts, do you mean actually?
So one consensus
One
call
per
per draft version.
Okay, that was the first thing. And if nobody responds, what will your determination of consensus be? It's happened to me.
I think we would have to look at. I think we'd have. I mean, okay. It kind of depends on what happened on GitHub before, but I think if there's been active discussion on GitHub, that would be a good indication that there is actual positive support something and nobody is really opposed to it. So I mean that's going to be a case by case basis, but in general, I would think that would not be dispositive to accepting consensus on changes.
So silence is consensus basically.
And silence in this particular channel as opposed to like all channels. Like if somebody poses a PR and it's non-editorial and nobody comments on the PR, I kind of think Ian wouldn't merge it, frankly. Or you know, and we'd ask for people to comment on that PR before we merged it. In the true, like in the weird corner case where there were no comments on a non-editorial PR and no comments in the last call, I think we'd have to talk about that. I don't know that we have a formal policy. We certainly don't have a formal policy on it. It seems like a weird corner case that would seek to avoid.
It's a weird corner case that I've found myself in multiple times over the last few months.
Well, no, so I mean, I think the email thread going dead is absolutely probably an expected outcome, the way we tend to work in this working group. But if GitHub is also dead, that would be surprising to me. Jonathan, can you flush people to the queue? Thanks.
Yeah, Jonathan Lennox. I'm concerned if you literally mean like add the XML diff, because those can definitely be dominated by editorial changes, especially if you move sections around or something. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, the point here is to try to summarize on all the design PRs in the call for consensus. So to indicate to the group that these are the things which is included in this draft, which might be most relevant. So
I will also say that we have, there's some momentum to like reorganize the draft, but if we do that, it will be a diff that is purely editorial and reorganizational and have no content in it. And so you should be able to reserve diffs without like having whole sections move so you can't tell what's new and what's not, which would be, of course, very bad. Anyone else? No. Sorry?
Q is end.
Thank you. All right, if there's nothing else, I don't hear any big red flags. So we're going to proceed with this experiment. Today's Wednesday, right? So yes, we'll have our next virtual 2 weeks from today, which I should probably schedule at the usual time. Well, how much time do we have? We have a couple minutes. Would anyone like to comment about how the virtual interims are going? Like I've asked a few times for feedback and we've gotten indirect feedback that it's not great. And I promise we won't bite if you want to tell us that like the time slot is bad or we are doing terribly at running it or something.
that's
okay, super. Thanks. I think next is Will, right?
Yes,
All right.
warp catalog.
Right, good afternoon. Will Loakamai. I'm going to be talking about the Over QUIC part of Media Over QUIC, because there is no media in MOQ transport. So where is the media? It's in these other layers, warp catalog and media interrupt. So next slide. At just ahead of Boston, a catalog design team was put together. We delivered a report at the Boston interim, which is documented. We also put out a written report on the email list about this. There were some decisions made in that meeting, basically that the catalog should not exist as an independent draft and not be the focus of interoperability. It was essentially a JSON document, and we decided that the focus of interop should be a media streaming format, because we want to actually be able to play media between all the various components in the distribution tree. So the diagram, the proposed architecture very roughly was MOQ transport, some type of streaming format, has a placeholder name of warp right now, having a packaging spec that it feeds into it. That format could be extended to support CMAF for those who wanted to do that, and in so doing reference ISO specifications, but the core streaming format would not. So these actions did receive a consensus approval at the time, and we're operating on that. So next slide. So following that decision.
No, I can't.
Next slide.
Sorry.
No worries. So I wrote PR 38. It basically added catalog into warp. I say back, I was going back in because originally it was there. We took it out and now we put it back in again. And there's a lot of text there you can read about it. The core point is in putting it back in, because it's constrained to only function for this media format and not for gaming or text chats or something else, we were able to simplify it. So next slide. So I removed streaming format versioning, I removed common track properties, I removed init tracks, removed selection properties, and catalog of catalogs. And what we're left with is, I think, a very simple JSON structure. There's still a version, but now it's the version of the streaming format that this is part of. And it's just is a list of tracks, and it contains information about it. And we can type these per track. So you can write a robust parser now, and we can dictate what are required, what are not required. And this will help us get to interop on these a little bit quicker. Next slide. We also, in a separate PR from Suhas, removed the direct CMAF packaging section. I've seen some comments on the list of how do we package a CMAF. The idea is we're going to create a separate streaming format draft that will extend the core one, and that will add in CMAF packaging. That's the idea. And now we go to next slide. So we had Alan and Geordie published MOQ Media Interop, known as MOQ-Me. So this, again, is a simple protocol aiming at much of the same objectives as warp. It also defines a new packaging format, WCP, that is similar but not quite the same as LOC, but I think trying to achieve the same aims. So this was published between Boston and today. Next slide. So I tried to put up a little comparison chart between the two, and green does not mean good and red does not mean bad. Green just means, yes, it has this feature, right? Something like rigid track naming. The current proposal says you call it video 1, video 2, video 3. Maybe that's not as flexible as giving it any name you want. Doesn't matter. I'm just highlighting that neither of these formats have everything that we might want going forward. Warp is certainly bigger because it contains a full catalog definition and it contains a timeline track definition. Next slide. So the question then becomes, for our interoperable media, what's the set of features that we want to support? And what I've listed here are the 11 features I think I put forward as candidates for us to support. The immediate reaction I get from some people is, there's a bit too much there, and all I want to do is like simple audio and video and one track of each, and that's it. My concern is I want to lay the groundwork for something we can actually deliver real media on, even if we don't build all the pieces first. So I think video codec support, I've pulled 3 out there. I think if we can show those 3, we can certainly add more in the future, but it's better supporting 3 than it is hard coding it to just 1 in the beginning. Audio codecs, same definition. I think we should use a catalog because it gives us extensibility in the future, a timeline track as well to describe the past in history. We need to show tokens working, right? We can easily build a solution that doesn't require tokens, but I think we shoot ourselves in the foot if we do that. Events are also important. Events are the mechanism to say something happened at this point in time. And it's the basis by which we do things like captions and subtitles. Those trigger events. We can also do ad insertion in the future using those same events. And you may trigger location information or coordinates of a car around a racetrack. There's a lot we can do with events. So we need a raw event syntax in there. We need to support real-time latency, interactive, and VOD. We have all the mechanics for that. We have the APIs to do all of those. And this interoperable media should do that. We need to show some type of content encryption, not DRM, but encryption. We need to show ABR working for those tracks that are packaged to be switchable. And we need to show some proof of concept of advertising. So I'm open to debate on this. This is an opinion on what the scope should be of this interoperable media format. Next slide. So some recommendations. We should merge WCP and LOC, the 2 packaging formats. I've spoken to Mo, spoken to Jordi, both are quite agreeable to this. So I think we can come up with a common packaging format that by design will be extensible to support CMAF later by just adding in extra definition. We should merge Warp and MOQ together to create a single interoperable media format, the scope being something along the prior slide, and that's something we need consensus on. We should then adopt that Warp.me draft as our interop point. And then after declaring it as the interop point, we need to write tests, we need reference tracks, and we need validation and testing tools. And that's the last slide. So
can I ask you a quick clarifying question? When you say merge Warp and MOQ, it seems like MOQ has a specific set of interoperability points that Warp might be a superset of. In particular, the number of codecs Warp might want to do on audio or video might change over time and might be larger than the MOQ. When you say merge them, can you talk about how you would deal with that kind of situation in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't want to speak to the authors of MOQ, but it's a very light, it's a super lightweight definition of how to structure audio and video and package it. So I think Warp can certainly accommodate that super lightweight. As you mentioned, it's a subset of what a larger interop point could define. So there's some interesting features in it, like rigid track naming. Maybe we adopt that, maybe we don't. But the idea was we could look at the best features of both and merge them into one.
Okay, but we're not going to inherit necessarily the limits of MOQ going forward from our. It's
Most
just an
certainly
interop.
not.
Okay, I think maybe
And I'm
little...
arguing for a broader interop point.
Okay, I appreciate that clarification. Thank you.
Alan Friedel speaking as one of the co-authors of MOQ. So first, let me just explain what Jordi and I were after when we wrote it, which is we have mock chat, which is for you've written mock T and you want to prove that you can do something. We have sort of this mock date, mock clock, which doesn't even have an interop draft. So we just wanted to write something down that was like, if you want to send audio and video, and really the simplest possible thing that you could do to show someone a demo that had a picture and you could listen to. And that is one of the reasons why it has fixed track naming. It doesn't touch anything related to catalog. It's definitely not intended as anything other than the next evolution in the testing of what we're building here. We don't ever expect to ship it and have it be an RFC. And it certainly didn't want to overlap or take away anything from Warp. My understanding of the reason why WCP was there was only because the current version of LOC wasn't quite appropriate and we needed something different. But yeah, there's no intention of keeping it around. But the way I view it is, if you look at what QUIC did, there was QUIC, and we were working on HTTP3 at the same time, but HTTP3 was big, it was complicated, had a large feature set, it was moving target. and we were ready to show something in between. And so the QUIC working group did a lot of interop, and perhaps still does, on HTTP 0.9 over QUIC. And that was just sort of an intermediate step that people could take when they weren't quite ready to do the full thing. So I think that was the intent. And so I didn't mean to step on anybody's toes by publishing. It was mostly documenting what we had already built. And I'm curious if you think that is Warp MI different than Warp?
No, I just gave it a name to say it's post some type of merge.
Okay, yeah, I didn't.
That's all.
I mean, I'm fine to throw MOQ.me in the trash if nobody wants to interop on it. If everyone's ready to interop on Warp, that's fine. We just wanted, when Warp also seemed, to me, that analogy was apt. Like Warp wasn't quite there, and we just wanted something.
Warp is not there, and Warp, what I would like to do is create drafts of Warp, just like we have drafts of mock transport that we interop on, and we get draft 1 of Warp, and you can interop on that, and maybe that looks very, very similar to MOQ.me today. And then we just expand the scope of what's covered in mock with each draft going forward. But you can interop on Warp versions.
Yeah, my thought, I mean, I'll open to everyone else in terms of people who are implementing, what do they want to interop on? Is something this simple, a la HTTP 0.9 over QUIC, is that a useful interop step, or is it a distraction from getting to Warp? And I think catalog is the big difference.
We're going to have to close the queue soon, so please enter it if you're going to, and please be brief.
So I think the intention is right, but the process is incorrect here. What we are trying to say is that we have a mock transport today. Interop is an Excel sheet that says what in the mock transport we are planning to interop for this interim or this IETF. MOQ.me is an example of how to use a subset of Warp, unlock some combination of that one to, let's agree on this as an interop example. That can be, as Alan said, is an example, a subset, and that you don't have to have a draft to go along with it. We agree on interop target and saying in this Warp, this subset will be done. And I think by merging, I think we're getting more work to us rather than saying what defines how to build an media application over QUIC or mock, and then we pick of that what subset we are planning to interop in every step. That would be a better way rather than having a couple of drafts coming along.
How do you allay my concern that we only ever interop on MOQ.me, and that actually becomes everyone runs off and does media like that?
No, for example, today
because that's what happens. Like, oh, it's working great. Roll it to production.
We basically, as a group, we need to agree what's the interop target. We don't need a draft for interop target. We need to say these are the features in Warp media application streaming format that we are going to interop on. One such subset is MOQ.me.
Yeah.
As Alan clearly said, they created MOQ.me because they saw there was some deficiency or missing, that things were missing in Warp and lock.
Suhas, I'm going to have to ask you to take this offline.
And I get what you mean.
Jonathan, you're out? Okay. Colin? Oh, okay. Maybe you have more time. Mo?
To make it real fast, I think examples should be a subsection of the Warp draft. I added examples to the LOC draft, and I think MOQ.me is basically examples of how to use Warp. I think they should be in the same draft, and you just specify, what the values are. Warp specifies the framework, and then an example section specifies what possible values could you put for a very simple, basic audio-video app.
I like that. Thank you.
Suhas, everyone bailed out of the queue, so if you have 2 more minutes, you could have 2 minutes. Okay.
I mean, I can maybe just reply real quick. Borrow that mic. Like, wow. So I don't think there's any risk of people outside of this room thinking that MOQ.me is like what this group is producing any more than anybody looked at HTTP 0.9 over QUIC and thought that's what they're going to do, right? It's intentionally hobbled so that people don't get the wrong idea. And it's a little bit simpler because it, like I said, doesn't have a catalog. It just says like, it's all got to look like this. If no one besides Jordy is ever going to implement it, like we can pull it down. Like, I didn't mean to cause a ruckus. I just thought if other people were at a point where they wanted to try to talk to what Jordy has built, and I think some people do, we just wanted to have it written down. And if there's a way to get to something that we can call Warp 0.1 or Warp 1, then I think Jordy probably don't want to speak for you, but probably get there sooner rather than later.
But what's the next steps here?
Well, these are the recommendations. I don't know, do the chairs need to ask for approval of these, or do we proceed with these barring objection?
Yes, Colin.
I'm trying to get in the queue. Right. So look, the strong thing I heard from the room, including Alan, was not to do those things. Just like do warp. And the media interop will become an example of how to use warp in the simplest way possible that we can get some interop done or whatever, right? But I mean, I don't even know what merge these would mean. We certainly don't want two or whatever. Yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, Will, do you think that the warp draft that you have there is, or actually, no, I'm sorry, you have not merged the draft yet. Okay.
I haven't merged those, and based on this, I'm not going to.
Right.
But we will. What I'll do is add an example section to Warp. That we'll get the guys working on lock and WCP to agree on a referenceable draft that Warp can then point to for packaging, and then we'll make an example section, and it will look identical to MOQ pretty much, and then that's what we can go off and interop on, and then it'll grow and get better in the future.
And you need to say anything, Jordi?
Really quick, that we created MOQ because I think I will mention, so not lock and not warp is an implementable state. So you cannot implement.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's why we wanted something.
Yeah,
we had to create something.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm sorry. So I think what you do over the group is a warp catalog draft that we can adopt, because we did decide to merge that, correct?
That's done. That's in there. So if you go look at what's on the ID repo right now, it is a version of Warp that has catalog in it.
Should we start an adoption call?
Okay. Is that ready? Is that ready for an adoption call?
Yeah.
Okay.
That
We'll
was-
start that on the list.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, second subject, and I'm going to try to go quick on this because I know there's pressure, but I think this is also something that's going to be very useful for a lot of streams. And this is the combined work of Gwendol, myself, and Mike English again. Next slide. So we've had this example of how you basically subscribe to a live stream just behind the live head. In the blue, you issue a subscribe first. It tells you, okay, the live head is 17. You start getting the blue objects, 17, 18, 19. At the same time, you do a fetch with a higher priority, and you fetch the objects and fill in. So you're able to start decoding 12, 13, 14, and eventually your live stream kicks in at 17. One issue with this is that there's two tracks competing for bandwidth at the same time, right? You're getting the results of your subscribe, admittedly at a lower priority with your fetch. But this is basically how I start up my subscribe. And if we go to next slide, now we look at how do we do ABR. By ABR, we mean I have multiple tracks, say high, medium, low bitrate, and I want to switch smoothly between them in response to throughput changes. In this case, you keep your subscribe open, right? And then you make a fetch, and you keep your old subscribe open, and you make your new subscribe, and you wait on the client for them to line up. And then when they do, you unsubscribe for your old one. And that's what's showing here. So there's a risk that definitely you're going to have two subscriptions open. So you've got two of them competing, which if you're switching up for bandwidth, maybe is not that bad. But if you're switching down, this is a really bad idea, because you're pulling two objects down when you only need to be doing one. And you might argue, well, why don't I unsubscribe? It'll tell me what my subscription point is on the relay, and then I can make a new subscription and maybe a fetch to fill the gap in. The trouble with that is if your RTT to the relay, say at 100 milliseconds, and you're looking at 60 frame per second video where I got a new object every 16 milliseconds, by the time I know what by the time I get the information of what my live edge is, it's changed, it's moved on. So I'm in this race condition to try to cleanly tie into the live edge. So this is really not a good approach to ABR. Next slide. And this is actually, I was describing a little bit of what this is saying. Unsubscribe and then fetch the difference. And here we risk either duplicated objects or we miss this gap forming, and we have to go back and maybe make a second fetch to fill it in. And all the time I'm killing my latency as I'm waiting for these fetches to resolve. So the fact that the client is separated from the relay can complicate this. Jonah.
Clarification question. The previous picture, was that a subscribe UHD at the bottom? Because it says unsubscribe track UHD.
In this case, you're switching from UHD to HD, so you're switching down. So
Oh,
you
I see.
unsubscribe
Okay,
from the blue one.
got it.
You
Thank you.
unsubscribe from the
I
one
wasn't paying
before.
attention to the colors. Thank you.
Yeah, we shouldn't get focused on UHD. HD is just blue track to brown track. Okay, so next slide, and then. So a proposal to address this problem and make switching live subscriptions really efficient. We propose a new method called switch, and what it does is an atomic transition on the relay, right? Not on the client. It does it on the relay. Why the relay? Because the relay is the one that knows the state. So in this case, in the upper example, if your relay has existing subscriptions, so we're given the example of switching from UHD down to HD. If it has a subscription, the relay can instantly unsubscribe from the UHD, and it has an ongoing subscription. For the HD, it just cleanly feeds you those bits, right? There's no gap. There's no duplicate data over the wire. The lower example here shows what happens if you don't have the track. In other words, so you ask the relay to switch. It then has to go upstream, subscribe to the HD track, which is what you want. And then those items will come in when those items come in, and it can see them coming in, then it can execute your switch for you. And you see that execute on the right-hand side.
Victor, do you have a clarifying question? You're muted if you do.
We'll continue then. Keep
Maybe,
going.
okay. Okay, next slide.
Yes, I am.
Oh, do you want to handle?
Finish your slide.
If you're unsure, the answer is no, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean,
Martin, you go Google. Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's many ways to do things in our protocol, but wouldn't you do it by doing subscribe update with like some end group and then start subscribing to HD at the next group? Like, wouldn't that solve all the race conditions?
So, subscribe update. So you're playing your original track,
right?
And then you unsubscribe at some point in the future that you guess at.
I mean, it's a subscribe update to the next group is like effectively a preset unsubscribe, right?
But you are, to some degree, you're making a guess that you're going to be able to switch by that point.
Yes.
And then you're going to update it if you find your guess is wrong. And every time we make guesses into the future, there's a risk, again, especially with higher RTTs, that we miss it, or that our subscribe update doesn't get there in time, and now we drop an object.
Right. So you have to pick a group ID.
You have to go really far ahead, and then really to get rid of the risk, you're going to overlap them, and it's the overlap we're trying to.
Okay, wait. We have a long queue, and if you are not going to ask a one-sentence question with a yes or no answer, you're going to wait for Will to finish his slides.
Simple clarifying question.
Good.
I read ahead and I saw that your switching point is only at object 0 of the next group. But does that also imply that you continue to deliver the current group at the current rate, or do you stop? Relay stops immediately.
You stop the old one at the boundary point.
At the time I send the switch.
The last object of the prior one, and then object 0 of the next group is what you deliver on your new switch.
No, I mean, so I send the switch command.
Yeah.
And then say I'm at object 5. Does the relay stop 6, 7, 8, or it continues serving 6, 7, 8?
Continues until the next future boundary.
Okay.
We don't go backwards.
Okay, Ian and Suhas, is it quick, or are you jumping out of the queue?
So does this assume that groups are aligned?
Yes, I've got a whole slide on what the assumptions are. Yeah.
Please.
Okay, next slide. So here's an API proposal. It's quite simple because it depends. We have an existing subscription that we're switching from. We supply that subscription ID, which is something we created in the first place. We supply the new track name. We supply auth info if necessary. It can always reuse the old auth info if we don't supply it. One thing that's missing from this that was pointed out to me just before, we need a track alias because the track alias is subscriber determined, not sender determined. But that would be another field here in the switch. And then we use our existing semantics of subscribe OK or subscribe error to tell us whether the switch was successful. We don't invent a new switch OK, switch error message. Next slide. So the assumptions. For this to work, you must have executed a prior subscription, right? You can't just switch to start a stream. The switch occurs at object 0 at the next mutual group boundary in the future. The group IDs are time synchronized between the track. This is what we have for ABR media today, and I think it's a reasonable assumption. The track namespace remains consistent. I think practically it will be. If you want to relax that constraint, we can add a new namespace to the track name tuple. That's not a big deal. We're also assuming group order, filter types, delivery timeout, max cache duration are all preserved across the subscription, so we don't need to re-specify them in the scripts. If you want to change them, you can use subscribe update to change them after the switch. And then next slide, which should be last slide. This was just an attempt at the server-side algorithm for how to switch. So if you've got an active subscription, which is the first use case, do you have it? You can simply stop sending at the group boundary. It's very easy for you to switch it forward. But in the other case, you need to go back, and then you have to find this matching point, right? And if you get down into the weeds a little bit, as you're about to send object 0 in your existing track, you have to go check, do I have object 0? Now, it might be only 10 milliseconds later or something. So you might in real life want to create a little buffer window when you're in a switching state to allow slight differences in track arrival time, object arrival time, not to delay your switch by another whole group, for example. But that's an implementation detail. Other than that, we don't think it's too complicated. That's the last slide, so go to queue for questions.
Mosinati, one question about the name and the ID. So you obviously have to give a new name somehow. So
Yeah.
the API includes a name, and the wire, you'll send some new name. And then, but you're saying reuse the same ID for two different
Same
track
subscription
names?
ID.
So, but now when you get objects coming in with a track ID or subscription ID, track alias subscription ID, it's kind of, isn't it ambiguous which one is which? It's,
Well, no,
there's
they'll
two
have
different
two
names being
different-
referenced by one ID?
They'll have two different track aliases.
Okay, so
I
same
mentioned
subscription
we
ID,
left
two
the
different
track
track
alias
aliases.
off, yeah.
So now we have a reason to have both track alias and
Well,
subscribe
that's a
ID.
whole nother debate. I didn't want to get in there.
But
I
there-
think
but there's
track
also subscribe
alias
ID.
would work. Well, no, yeah, we'd have to supply a new track alias, but other than that, I'm all for dropping subscription ID and just going to track.
Okay, but it's not track alias. You have to send the actual track name. You have to send the whole track name up in your switch request.
And
you're
an
saying-
alias that we want to use for it. It's just like a new subscribe. It's user selected track alias.
Okay, so there's a new name, a new alias, same ID.
Yes.
Okay.
So, Colin James, yeah, obviously the alias issue needs to be worked out, but it seems like it's workable. And the important thing is the control plane has a subscription ID that stays the same, and the data plane has only a track alias, which does change so that when you receive data, you know which one to do.
And so keeping the subscription ID allows us to keep all the other attributes. We don't have to re-specify them.
Right.
And I think they would normally be kept across a switch, so it's efficient.
That makes sense. So look, my question actually has to do with the, I mean, I get how this works. I can see this being fine. I'm sort of back to the requirements of what we want to have happen on, so switching up, switching up to a higher bit rate seems pretty clear. You want to switch at the beginning of the next group and keep giving my current group, which is what this does. But switching down, I think for us, I would think that was usually a situation where things were going badly and you might want to actually stop receiving the higher resolution group in the middle of it, or as soon as you could fill in you might start receiving the previous group. You might try and fill it in.
Yeah, I get that.
You know what I mean?
In that case, don't use switch.
Don't use switch.
Just unsubscribe what you have and make a new subscription, or do a fetch. You'd have to do a fetch into the past.
So I do a subscribe of the low def.
Yeah.
Do a fetch to fill in the pack. And then as soon as I got enough fill in to start playing,
make your subscribe.
Unsubscribe.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I sort of feel like we should wrinkle through all these sort of cases and think about how many of these can we solve that way? And like, I think what Martin was getting at too is, can we do basically this just by subscribes where we put the right in where we say, look, at the beginning of the next group, and look, our RTT better never be anywhere close to the length of a group. I mean, you know, if our RTTs are that high, we probably have other problems.
No
you know,
media on Mars.
no media on Mars, not with this anyway. Deep space is farther than Mars. But I think the point I was getting at is I feel like I'd want to sit down and really go through some whiteboarding and see if by using combinations of updating subscribes with the correct endpoints and starting new subscribes, we could accomplish all of the same thing you're trying to achieve here without adding a new thing. And maybe we can. So, I mean, I feel like I need to work through those cases a little bit of what Martin was talking about.
Ian's, but as an individual, I kind of agree. I would like a little more motivation, because every time I try to like actually come up with a case that I think I can't do, I can do it. And so maybe I'm not like thinking about the right cases, but like, I think I can do all the things that you commented on in there, at least in the current draft. The other thing is you can actually start and do a subscribe at the current group boundary. Now, I think there's a presentation because a lot of people hate that, but there's also a lot of people who love it. So like, at least at the moment, you can just say, start at the current group and go. So.
Yeah, so this is not just as a rebuttal to Ian. I think we've tried to use subscribe, and we think the difficulty of timing everything correctly, it's far more complex than having an atomic API like this that executes it for you. So you may be able to, under the right conditions, make stuff work. And there's no requirement to use this API. But for the vast majority of ABR switching, which is switching up and down with a comfortable buffer, this would provide a reliable and relatively simple method of doing it on the client.
Jonathan, thanks. First, is there a client priority or a subscriber priority in this?
Priority stays the same.
Because I mean, if you had a new priority, then you could solve the case that Colin was describing by setting the new one a higher priority, and then the old group would trickle out in whatever bandwidth is available.
You could. So that would address somewhat having two subscriptions in flight at the same time.
Yeah, set the new one a higher priority, and then the old one comes if it can. Otherwise, it doesn't, and you can cancel it if once it's not useful. The other question I had is on your assumptions slide. Are those things that the client would know from the catalog?
Yes.
Is that in the catalog draft now?
Yes, there's something called render group. And basically it's a number, and everything with the same number is something that you can comfortably ABR switch between. Okay, and it's cool. a signal for that. So we did put that in. Cool.
So I think I'm aligning with thoughts like Ian and Martin had at this point, because like I did try with using subscribe update, because the idea here is that you don't want to switch, you have to switch on a boundary so that you can be able to decode it. And subscribe update gives you a say that whenever the next boundary is, get to me, as a client, what track you're receiving at that point, and when, how, the group size too. It's not like it's totally unknown, but you can always say start from the next group. And
right, but that next group might be 5 milliseconds away. And by the time you say to start at it, you've already passed it. The relay's already passed it. That is part of the problem. Your client may not know the RTT it has to the relay. Web clients don't know. So there is some complexity there.
Sure, we can think about it, but I did try, and I'll have to try some more examples with the different network conditions. But the current draft we have should get you what you need. But I think Jonathan's point about priority is important. That needs to be considered as well.
Okay.
Zafar?
Hi. In one of the interims, we propose a similar proposal for track switching, but by adding a property to the subscribe message, which is called switch track ID. But as I stated in the message, as a message, that any message type seems more explicit, actually, frankly, and we have implemented this switch track ID in our demo, and it works well. So the things that Will stated in his presentation are valid. So there happens a seamless transition between tracks. We use the same method. So we cut off at some point and quit sending the objects for the previous track and started sending the new track. And it worked very well. So that was our experience. Thanks.
Ian Sweat, I have a comment. It seems like there's a lot of questions about what we can and can't do with the current draft. Does it make sense to create like a Google Doc and like literally write down all the things that?
Yeah,
how it would be
I
done
think
today. And
the next step here is we should probably explore, can we use existing APIs to robustly do this under varying RTT conditions?
Yep.
And if we identify that we can't, although Zafar just mentioned they've done experimental testing with something very much like Switch, and they came to the conclusion that that's what they needed. I don't know if people were able to understand him there.
I'm very much open to the idea that this is necessary, and I think this is totally implementable, but I would just, if we could go through every use case and understand like, oh, this is why this doesn't work as well, that would be hugely helpful.
Yeah, okay, that sounds good.
But that's kind of an interactive process, I think, probably.
I really like the idea, and I think it's very easy to implement. And having this mechanism, and although we have some experience from Zafar, that points also to that direction. But I also think that the idea of Jonathan to consider priorities and to make the switch, I think we should also think about that. But I like this idea.
Okay.
Really quick, just +1 Ian, exactly. Let's work through it, and we may end up at this.
Okay, that clears the queue. Will, do you have what you need? Do you want us to ask a question to the community, like if they would like to see PR, or do you think, are you convinced that we need to do something before then?
No, so I'm going to open up a Google Doc was the suggestion.
Okay.
Or maybe an issue to track it, and maybe a Google Doc to hold more complicated text than the issue holds.
All right.
And go through the use cases and try to explore, can you get creative with priorities and make sure that we don't have gaps and that we have an efficient switch. And if we can prove that we can't, then I'll open a PR on switch. Create an issue, and that issue will reference a document, I think, because we might need a bunch of pictures and stuff.
Jana Ingar, I generally just broadly, I like what you're proposing here in the sense that it seems like it solves some problem that is potentially solvable, but the abstraction here seems to be significant enough that it seems valuable. But ultimately, I just want to say that whatever Google Doc you produce, the arguments that you come out with, please put them in the draft, because it'll be very useful to articulate. If you end up having switch in the draft, then having those arguments in the draft is going to be very useful for the future as well.
Yeah.
All right, the queue is empty. If you are satisfied, Will, then thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, next up is Ian, here to talk about timestamps.
Ian Sweat, as an individual, this is actually very good ordering. Thank you, Will. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about timestamps and MOQ. And as Will just said, in his case, he just assumed that all the groups were aligned. This is a reasonable assumption in a lot of use cases. It is not always true, though, especially like audio and video commonly have very different GOP sizes. And increasingly, we have variable GOP sizes in order to improve kind of the encoding quality. Next slide. So there are some, in my mind, a few issues today. Delivery timeout and max cache duration are both relative to time of object header receipt, which gets really weird if you have object reordering, but even without it, like it's kind of close enough, but it's a little awkward. It's certainly not precise. In particular, if encoding of content takes a long time, or there's some other hiccup in the sort of process, say it takes, you have a 2-pass encoding algorithm, so it takes an extra second or something to produce your AV1, but maybe your AV1 is actually like much slower bit rate, so you'd rather get it through the pipe faster, but it takes quite a while to produce. It's hard to get things back in sync. Again, group boundaries can help, but I'm not sure that's always a requirement we want to have. The other thing, which I think is probably more near and dear to my heart, is that server-side ABR is pretty darn impractical without some sort of timestamps. It's not required, but I think we're going to want it. And you know, a key use case is something like a fairly short jitter buffer, 15 seconds, 5 seconds for sports, and timestamps really help immensely there to do buffer management and try to do things like this switch proposal. If you had timestamps, you could actually figure out like, hey, do I need to immediately stop sending the higher quality and immediately send the low quality because there's just no way like the high quality is getting even to the end of this group? Or like, do I kind of keep sending high quality and then immediately start sending low quality at the next group boundary? So like things like timestamps give you a lot more ability potentially to do things like that in a more intelligent way.
Do you have a clarifying question, Will?
Yeah, it was on the.
Oh, go to the mic.
Just on clarifying that it's impractical without timestamps. If you condition your content like we suggested, right? My allergy to putting timestamps as a core component of the track is they make sense for media, but they don't make sense if you're a game engine, right? Where you might be concerned about XYZ coordinates or some other shader information that you want to switch on, right? Timestamp is a very particular attribute. It's a payload attribute, and I think timestamp should be in the payload, and we need a generic abstraction, which is the group ID, to say where you switch. And you construct your groups such that you switch the group boundary no matter your application.
Yeah. Okay. See that. Let's get that. Okay. So next slide. My proposal is a very high level, which is adding an optional timestamp, likely relative to the beginning of the track, in some sort of unit, likely millis, but it doesn't have to be. And then now we can make things like delivery timeout and max cache duration actually kind of relative to that number, and based on the timestamp. There is there are some use cases like for like Meet live streaming where like this could end up being quite helpful, or Meet video conferencing. Next slide. So this slide is now obsolete because apparently we killed Alan's option 1 this morning. But if you had timestamps, if you wanted different tracks, you would probably use different tracks for different layers if you wanted strict prioritization, as in I want all of the base layer and then all of the enhancement layer. And then if you wanted the like PEEP style, like within a group prioritization of do group order and then do within group prioritization, then you would use PEEP priorities, aka Alan's proposal. But I think we just voted not to do this. So, but I just kept this slide in there because I made it. I will say it is nice to be able to cancel the enhancement layer entirely. Like again, Meet I know does this today where, if they know you're never ever going to get the 30 frames a second, they just don't even ask for it. Or if it's in like a little window and they're like, user can't tell the difference between 7 and 30, they're just, I asked for 7 and I don't even ask for like the upper layers. So that's it.
So just a quick clarifying question on this. So it would be each object would have a timestamp is the proposal, right?
It would be optional, but at the very least on a group boundary, you would have a timestamp or in a PEEP at the beginning of it, and then subsequent objects like could have timestamps. But in a lot of cases, you probably would only need it on the group boundary, really.
Right. Okay. And then, and then just is like make it one of our optional headers or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, like I think this would be fine as an extension, but we don't have extensions yet. So question mark. I mean, I'll be totally honest. Like,
I think our implementation's using an extension that we don't have to do exactly this. So I think I'm in favor. I think I come around to yes, this sounds like a great idea.
But if we wanted to like do this, but like say like this is our poster child for extensions and extensibility, then I think that is a totally reasonable way forward as well. If something like, especially if you're already doing something similar, Kellen. Yeah.
So yes, as Cullen said, like we have a log draft that updated that includes a timestamp object header extension, and that's the only thing that did not interrupt because we were the only who supported. So I think that the idea is useful as in for the media use cases, and we can start getting wheels PR merged at some point soon.
Okay, great.
Thanks.
Mosinati, the log draft does already have this timestamp extension. What I will note though is that nobody can ever agree about timestamps. Like in RTP, we have like at least 4 or 5 timestamps. And just Monday, there was another proposed timestamp. If we do want a universal timestamp across generic objects, not just media specific timestamps like Will was saying, that needs some, coming together and figuring out, because it's not clear to me that there is a universal timestamp that everybody's going to agree to.
That's a fair point. Yeah, the intent here would be purely to have a timestamp that is for transport delivery purposes. It is not to have like a media synchronization timestamp, for like AV sync or something like that. Like this would be available to the transport, and I don't know, probably you shouldn't even make it available to the application because the application might actually use it. That'd be awful. I mean, people do terrible things. Yeah.
Gwendol from Cinemedia. Can we use the timeline track to embed the timestamp and to add to the groups and to the tracks?
It's a good point. Potentially, I don't know.
Well, it's not visible to do this.
Yeah, that's kind of what I was wondering.
Jordy? No, I'm sorry, Colin. Sorry.
Okay, so assuming we do this, were you also proposing that maybe we go and redo our various forms of timeouts to be relative to this, like so that we don't have all the problems we have?
Yes, the intent was that's the only negative of making it optional is if we make it required, say at the beginning of every group, then like we can actually redo all of our timeouts in terms of like something that's like based on this time instead of like when I happen to receive the object, which is sometimes really weird.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be really excited about seeing a PR that tried to sort out the details of that and how to do it or how to make it maybe optional or how to have it all the time, whatever, that explored this space. I think this is great.
Okay, that's good feedback. I mean, I think you're right that I probably this deserves a PR partially because the details matter so much, and it could be that the details actually end up being really simple, and that's nice. And if that can happen, that'd be great. And if they're terrible and complex, then yeah, we should not do that. Yeah, Jordy.
Yeah, I really like that proposal, but from a transport point of view. So when you say that this will make exact or much more accurate delivery timeout and the max age, I think that's a perfect argument. But the thing that I don't like or that I think that's not aligned very well is when you start with examples about media. I think we shouldn't confuse this timestamp with media timestamp. So for instance, the log that we are talking about on MOQ, I already put some timestamp there, but that is related to media. I think if we confuse these two layers, very bad things could happen.
That's a good point. Yeah, thanks. Oh.
Sorry, yeah, very similar point. We should maybe call this wall clock time and to disambiguate it from media time, which would be different. And if it's wall clock time, we have all these problems about accuracy, right? Is it UTC is it, and are you NTP sync?
I was suggesting not doing an absolute time at all and just doing it relative to the start of the track. But I mean, I can.
But when you say start of the track,
the first
according to the server clock.
I mean, sure, time, yes. According ideally to a single clock, but yes, I get the time's hard. I am not going to diminish that.
But when we do that, there's a whole lot of coming from the Dash world as well, where we're very dependent on time. And we ended up having to create pointers to which clock do you trust so that everyone else can line up with you, or you embed timestamps. So we open a can of timing worms.
So I'm hoping that this is an easier problem to solve than the media playback time issue, because like AV sync is like a very challenging problem and precision is so critical. Like that's one of the reasons I mean, like if you're off by like a millisecond here, like the system should still work. Otherwise we're like really in a bad place. Like I think so, like, and getting millisecond level precision on like a single clock is usually not too bad.
And could you give a use case where we would actually use this? You said server AB switching, but you don't need it as long as your group IDs are synchronized.
I mean, I wanted to use it for server side ABR just straight up as in like, I want this by this delivery timeout, and because you know how fast time is going as like, groups and objects come through, that like my groups are 4.7 seconds long or something, and that like how much buffer I have. But
how would a relay know the group length? You'd have to signal that as well. Because it doesn't have access to a catalog.
Well, it just would see the timestamp of like this group, you know, starts at
You
this
would
time.
have to have a
It
history.
just do a
of-
delta. Yeah,
You would have
like
to
a brief-
observe timestamps over time.
for the last like group, basically. I mean, not very long, right? But like last group or two.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, yeah, I think you're going in the right direction here around the times, but as I said, there's a reason why RTP has so many timestamps, or actually is actually lacking it at timestamp. So I think this definition aspect of this needs to be written down and clarified, and how it reacts over the different depths of relays.
Thank you. Actually, that's usually helpful feedback. So.
Yeah, a couple clarifying questions. One is, your proposal here talks about it as an extension, but I couldn't quite tell if I heard some people say no, that it shouldn't be an extension. So is your intention still to write it as an extension, or?
I'll write it as a PR as a not extension, because that allows me to actually like change how delivery timeout and max cache duration work. If I have text that says, if this is present, then delivery timeout and max cache duration work this way, and if it's not present, it works that way. I think that's going to be really confusing, and like it's going to just make the draft horribly complex. It's going to be like, do you want to write every congestion controller with and without SAC? No, you don't.
Okay, and then the other question I have clarifying is about, you're saying it's like since the beginning of the track, and I'm thinking about a case like, let's just consider a case where we have not video switching, but audio versus video. Would like, I don't know, if I'm publishing my audio track, your assumption is that the audio track and the video track would start at the same timestamp? If I started them at the same time?
Yes, my intent is that like all of the audio video tracks that are association with the publication would all like start at 0 or whatever.
Okay, so there would be some common reference point for
Yes.
some group of
Yes.
tracks.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Also clarifying
It
question.
doesn't have to be, we don't have to start at 0. I don't know. That'd be up to implementation, I think.
And I'm sorry, is this timestamp part of the object metadata?
That would, yes.
Publisher generated, okay.
But I was thinking about putting it at the beginning of a peep, but I'm not sure. Maybe I should put it on every object. So it doesn't really matter. It's probably a byte either way because of delta encoding.
Okay, John, be brief, please.
I think it'd be valuable to actually write down the use cases here, because I have a use case in mind. I keep wanting to come up to the mic and ask you if it's meaningful, but I'd just rather have you first describe what use cases you have in mind and then see if mine fits in there. I'll leave it at that. But yeah, thanks.
Okay, Ian, do you have what you need? Do you want us to ask the group if they want to see PR, or?
I'm going to make a PR anyway at this point because I want to see myself. I just want to see what it looks like in text. And so like, if everyone hates it, that's fine. I've written PRs everyone hates. And we're past that.
Very well.
I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Shamim, are you out there? Okay, Shamim, you're missing your moment here if you're out there. He's not in the meeting. Okay. So Tianji, I believe you are the first up of the if time permits folks for mock relay network handling.
Short presentation, but thank you, Ian. Actually, it's already mentioned some extensibility of the MOQT. This is a draft, myself and with my co-authors, Javier and Raymond from InterDigital. Okay, next slide. So this is regarding, wow, okay. So, yeah, kind of messed up here. I don't know why. But this is regarding some real case. We have already standardized in the 3GPP 5G that leverage the MOQT because we consider the MOQ is an elegant solution. So it's called XRM, extended reality and multimodality. So it's going to require high throughput and low latency and also high reliability. So just to look at the bottom pictures from the right-hand side is the media server is going to send a media, the payload, the data, and then toward the UPF is like a router, but is running inside the 5G system. And we're going to have the MOQ relay running on UPF. And the UPF will send the the published data, the media part, and send it toward the left side, the clients. So this is just like a very high-level description about how this transport path is set up. So the thing for the media part, and it's going to have the media payload, and also we call the PDU, it's a PDU set. The PDU set is like a set of PDUs. And then for PDU, each PDU is like an object. It has some metadata information like a PDU sequence number, PDU set sequence number, PDU set importance or end of burst, and also some like time to the next burst. So actually the time step is very important or very useful for this type of things. So all those information, if the media itself is not encrypted, that means about the 3GPP, we have done the extension by using RTP header extension to put those PDU set metadata into the RTP header extension and send to the MOQ relay. And the MOQ relay, when it open it, it can just get that information and send it down toward the RAN side. And the RAN will use those metadata to do the resource scheduling and optimization. Now, the thing is, the challenge part is if this media is encrypted and so with the RTP header extension. In that case, when this thing is transported the MOQ relay, it cannot know those metadata information. Can you go to the next one? Yeah, those, yes. Oh, Jesus. Okay. Yeah, because those are encrypted. That's why you cannot say it. So, yeah, now the thing is, yeah, now the thing is like for the cipher, this is the real case, standardized already. So now we try to leverage or repurposing the object metadata is defined in MOQ the draft already, and then to map from the left in the middle picture, that is yeah, you can see something like you know, ED, PSI, PSS, and those metadata information associated with PDU set. Those will be mapped based on the current metadata field in one per object. And then so far we repurposing the mapping right now by leveraging things. But the challenge part is the mapping accuracy. It's going to affect the controllability of the MOQ object, sure, and also the extensibility. The things like, because this is the current release on 5GS, and for the future, when we try to extend it, we are going to, we have to do something, maybe the tweak, or to do more repurposing or leveraging part. But there is a better scheme with the PR. It's not showing there.
Yeah. So Tianjie, you're at about a minute. What
yeah,
do you,
it's just like try to get that
okay,
one.
so
yeah.
do you want to take comments on the list, or
well,
do you want
like,
discussion time?
Well, discussion time for 1 minute. Can we
Okay.
get that one?
All right.
Yeah, it's a 502, PR 502. Actually, it's not showing there. Yeah, because I don't know, slide got messed up. So. It's a 502. Yeah.
Yeah, I think all these discussions in the last 15 minutes shows that the WIS PR has to go to the next level, where we are using it for end-to-end encryption. We are using it for media and sorry, Ian had a use case for something, and you have a use case.
Yes, this is a real case. Yeah.
I think we should consider as a working group on how to move that PR forward next.
Okay, sure. Thank you. Yeah. You're done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Really appreciate. Yeah.
Thank you, Tianjie. Mo, you're next. You have 10 minutes.
I think I can do it faster.
Awesome.
Okay, so this is the low overhead container updates. Next slide. And this will eventually be merged into the Warp media format. It was based on web codecs, and we can or cannot have catalog for using this. Next slide. This forget CMAF. I think nobody is carrying the torch for CMAF anymore. So next slide. We don't need to bother with CMAF.
We see you will.
And why did we pick web codecs? Well, because it already makes a registry of all the different audio and video media types that we care about. Somebody else had a slide up. I think Will had a slide up of what we think is, mandatory to, codify as media interop points. Web codecs has already bothered to do all that work, and there are registries for it. So let's just reuse them. Don't create another IANA registry. Don't create a bunch of new specs. So that's why we're standardizing on web codecs. You don't actually have to use web codecs to use log. You could do, native implementation, not even a web browser-based implementation, and use it without any web codecs tie-in whatsoever. You're just referencing those registries for convenience. Next slide. Okay, the changes. The biggest change by far is we used to have a payload header to say things like the timestamp and the sequence and all these other fields. We removed that payload header, and now the payload is exactly the web codecs payload. It's exactly the internal data or the raw elementary stream of the media of the encoder. The extra metadata is now encoded in this new PR502 extension header, MOQ object header extensions. And so what that allows us to do is separate out the true payload, which could be end-to-end encrypted, from the headers. And we added a security and privacy considerations section, which details whether or not those metadata fields, those header extensions, which would currently be in the clear for, well, I say in the clear, in the QUIC connection, they're still obviously encrypted, but they're in the clear to the relays. So the relays that are terminating that QUIC stream can see those headers. So whether or not some of those fields may be sensitive and you want to hide them from the relays is an open issue. So we may need to have some optional encryptability of those particular header extensions. The other major change is to align with what Jordy was mentioning about web codecs not properly supporting some newer payload formats. The new H.264 and 5 payload formats called AVC3 and HEV1. Those new formats are not properly supported by web codecs. We have an open issue under web codecs to fix that. But in the meantime, LOC has been updated to say we will support any format that web codecs emits. And we put in rules about how to handle the parameter sets or the start codes or length prefixes in any case, whether you're configuring as AVC1 or AVC3, you'll be able to handle that and stream it over LOC in either case. And then we also had a lot of examples that were added at the end to show how you would actually populate the catalog fields and the object header fields when you have sample audio tracks, sample flat video tracks, sample video tracks with temporal scalability, or with scalable spatial layers. So all those examples are in the draft now. Next slide. That's the new header format. So again, the MOQ header extensions map directly onto the LOC header extensions. The LOC header extensions are a subset. You could have some other MOQ header extensions that have nothing to do with LOC, because I think we have a lot of other use cases now for this header extension mechanism. And again, the payload maps directly to the LOC payload. MOQ payload is exactly the LOC payload, not a subset, but the full thing. And again, the payload is exactly the internal data of whatever you get from output from web codecs, from the encoded audio and video chunks. Next slide. This is the main open issue about how to deal with this web codecs not supporting AVC3 and HEV1 properly. For people that don't know or understand the issue, the basic problem is for video codecs, the ITU, ISO video, MPEG video codecs, they have a concept of parameter sets, which are basically just like headers and metadata about the actual pixels. And sometimes those parameter sets are just prefixed with the stream itself. So every time you get a keyframe, you put those headers called parameter sets right with the keyframe before every keyframe. And that's called NXB format. And sometimes you strip those headers off and you put them off in a separate bucket when you do stored disk content like MP4 streaming. And that's called extra data. You put them in a blob called extra data, and then that blob lives somewhere else and the stream doesn't carry those headers. So the keyframes are kind of naked and need this other metadata to be decodable. LOC is going to support both formats. You can either have those parameter sets in band with every keyframe, or you can have them separately stored and outside the spec, have a means to provide them with every keyframe. And then also the other major difference is when something is emitted from the encoder, the way you separate individual parts of the frame can either be a start code prefix, which is 0001, or it could be a length prefix. And the MP4 camps do it with link prefixes. This NXB camp does it with start codes. LOC, again, is being flexible and supporting both ways. So we specify a methodology where you can just look to see whether it's actually a start code or a length prefix. And regardless of what you get out of the encoder, you can recover what it is. And you could also, when you get a stream coming in, you can feed your decoder either the length prefix or the start code. And so that's it. That's a major change.
Thanks, Mo. I think this goes in the perfect right directions, and I agree with all the directions that you are setting here. But there are two things that I don't. One comment and one thing that I don't agree. The comment is that even this recommendation is not implementable, because you are calling extra data, but you are not specifying, for instance, for S264, what this extra data is and how the has to be encoded. So then we need more detail to make this implementable. And the second is that when you said using MOQ extensions to add the extra data or for X264, probably ABC decoder record. I don't agree at all with that approach, because you are crossing layers. So you are putting into transport layer media information. And this seems ugly.
So currently LOC doesn't specify how to carry the extra data. Extra data is always, so today extra data is outside of the media objects, right? MDAT carries your media, and then the extra data is in sample entry headers. So extra data is kind of outside of the media. So LOC doesn't specify how to carry that extra data. You could carry it in a LOC header extension, in a MOQ header extension, or you could carry it as a MOQ object, a totally separate MOQ object if you wanted to. LOC doesn't specify that part. If you want to specify it, we can talk about how best LOC can explicitly specify it. The way it is right now, it's just out of the spec. And if you have extra data and you transport it yourself in any way, you're free to, and then provide it anyway to the decoder, you're free to. If you think we should specify exactly how it should be transported, we can work on that.
To the decoder, you need to provide it in some very specific way. You can transport it in a way that you want, but you need to provide it in a very specific way to the decoder.
By far, the simplest and best way is to put it with every keyframe. It's needed for every keyframe. It was an Apple dumb decision to take it out of the keyframes and put it in a move object. And that was codified in MP4 by mistake. And now we live with this baggage for years.
I 200% agree with ABC3 is the right way, but
let's move it along.
We don't have it in webcode.
So clarification question, Mo. So if I remember correctly, web codex asks you to send it out of band, right? The extra data in the web codex spec. Is that right or wrong? If I remember correctly.
Yeah, it's in the object headers. So web codec, objects have a bunch of fields: duration, timestamp, 20 other header fields. Then there's the payload, which is the actual media that came out of the encoder.
Yeah.
So extra data is not part of that media that came out of the encoder. It's in this object headers.
Makes sense. One follow-up question on that one is that, are we asking web codex working group to do something?
The very bottom one is, yes, we're asking them to fix. So right now, so Jordy tried setting the codec string to AVC3, and it doesn't, it silently says, okay, but it actually emits AVC1.
Right.
So there's a problem in web codecs where it's not understanding these new codec strings correctly. It thinks that they mean the same thing as the old codec strings. They don't. They mean something new. And web codecs doesn't support that something new yet. So we'll get that fixed, but regardless of whether or not that gets fixed, LOC can still handle either format.
Okay, I think I only have 15 seconds to ask my question, which is, is the relay ever going to use the LOC metadata? And if so, why is it in the object extensions and not inside the payload part?
It could potentially use it. So one of the extensions is the frameworking, which had things like the discardability bit, the temporal layer ID, spatial layer ID, base layer sync point. There were some other flags in there that could be potentially useful for a relay. They're more intended for a media switching node, which is not just a relay, but actually a more media aware element. But yeah, relay could use the discardability flag, for example.
Mo, do you have an ask of the group?
Not really. We're going to eventually merge this into Warp. If nobody has any objections to it.
Okay.
We'll merge it into Warp and.
Excellent. All right, lovely. Thank you. All right, we don't really have time for another presentation, so thanks everyone, especially to our Mo, our scribe, who also presented. Our next meeting is a virtual interim, which has just been announced on the list about 10 minutes ago, which will be 2 weeks from today at the usual time, 9 o'clock Pacific. Our next in-person / hybrid meeting will be February 24th to 26th in Denver, Colorado, the same place we had it last time in Colorado. The first day will be interop, and Tuesday and Wednesday will be issue discussion, and that will be the week after Mile High for those of you who are media folks and will be there anyway, and that's not a coincidence. For those of you who are only mild MOQ enthusiasts, we will see you in Bangkok. There will be in a hybrid. There'll be virtual support, but people will be there in person. Mo, come get your stuff. Mo, come get.
I'll deliver.
Okay.
Here. Or you want to eat a piece?